When we think about capital punishment, we often focus on the moral and ethical debates surrounding it, but there's another crucial aspect we tend to overlook: the consequences of execution mishaps. These botched executions can have far-reaching and devastating effects on not only the individuals involved but also on the justice system as a whole. When an execution goes wrong, it often results in prolonged suffering, as the intended method, whether lethal injection, electrocution, or any other form, fails to work as planned. These failures can cause the condemned individual to experience significant pain or remain conscious long after they should have been executed. Such incidents highlight the technical and logistical challenges of carrying out the death penalty, emphasizing how even the most carefully planned procedures can go awry, leading to an execution that is anything but swift or efficient. Despite the criminal's actions, these botched executions underscore the harsh realities of a system designed to deliver irreversible punishment. If you're fascinated by true crime stories and the darker side of reality, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for more gripping tales, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let's dive into today's chilling case. Jesse Tafaro. On May 4, 1990, the state of Florida executed Jesse Joseph Tafaro, but what should have been a swift end to a convicted murderer's life turned into a horrifying spectacle that would spark outrage across the nation. The story of Jesse Joseph Tafaro is not only one of chilling murder and betrayal, it's also a haunting testament to the horrors of a botched execution. On May 4, 1990, Tafaro, convicted of the brutal murders of 2 law enforcement officers, met his fate in Florida's electric chair, a death sentence that would go down in infamy. But the execution was far from the swift, final moment it was meant to be. On that day, Tafaro was strapped to the infamous old Sparky electric chair. His crime, alongside his wife, Sonny Jacobs, and accomplice, Walter Rhodes, was the ruthless killing of Florida Highway Patrol Officer Philip A. Black and Ontario Provincial Police Corporal Donald Irwin during a routine traffic stop. The details of the crime were murky, with conflicting testimonies from Rhodes and Tafaro himself, but what was certain was that 2 officers were dead, and Tafaro was sentenced to death. What followed in the execution chamber, however, shocked the world. The machine that was supposed to deliver swift justice malfunctioned horrifically. Tafaro's head caught fire. 6-inch flames shot out of his skull, a grotesque and horrifying scene that unfolded in front of witnesses. The cause? A synthetic sponge, improperly used in place of the sea sponge required for proper conductivity and a quick, painless death. As the electricity surged through his body, Tafaro's execution was anything but swift. It took 3 separate jolts of electricity over a span of 7 agonizing minutes before he was finally declared dead. The flames burning from his head were not the only sign of the botched execution. There were reports that members of the execution team had tampered with the machine, possibly making the process even more painful and prolonged than it should have been. The details of Tafaro's execution became a flashpoint for death penalty opponents, who seized on the gruesome nature of the botched execution to argue against capital punishment. The incident raised disturbing questions. Was this truly a mistake, or was there something more sinister at play? Inmates later claimed that old Sparky had been intentionally fixed, perhaps to turn the execution into something closer to torture. Regardless of the truth, the image of Tafaro's head bursting into flames became forever etched in the memories of those who witnessed it, and it would later be rumored to have inspired Stephen King's infamous scene in The Green Mile. Charles Walker. In a dark twist of fate, Charles Thomas Walker's execution became an unforgettable moment in Illinois history. An event marked not by the closure of a violent chapter, but by its botched execution. The man who had spent a lifetime steeped in crime, from a troubled childhood to a string of brutal offenses, would meet his end not by the smooth certainty of justice, but by a malfunction that kept him struggling for breath in the final moments. Walker, born in 1940 in Fayetteville, Illinois, lived a life marked by violence and despair. Raised in a broken home, he quickly fell into a cycle of crime and substance abuse. Over the years, Walker's crimes escalated from armed robbery to a shootout with police that cost him his right eye, culminating in the 1983 murders of Kevin Paul and Sharon Winker. On June 18, Walker met the couple at a creek in St. Clair County, robbed them of $40, tied them to a tree, and then killed them both. Paul with a shot to the temple and Winker with one to the back of the head. Afterward, he went on a robbery spree, but was eventually captured in Colorado. After pleading guilty, Walker was sentenced to death in 1983, choosing to forego further appeals despite the looming weight of the sentence. As the years passed on death row, Walker's fate seemed all but certain. On September 12, 1990, he would become the first person executed in Illinois in nearly 30 years. Yet, in a final irony, the lethal injection that was supposed to end Walker's life would do anything but. The state of Illinois had revived the death penalty, and Walker's execution was the first test of its procedures. But as the chemicals were supposed to flow into his body, something went wrong. The tubes, kinked and twisted, blocked the flow of the lethal drugs. Walker's body tensed as he struggled to breathe, his final moments drawn out in a macabre dance of error and inefficiency. The execution that was supposed to end his life quickly instead stretched into a prolonged ordeal, a tragic reminder of how even justice can falter. Wilbert Lee Evans. The night of October 17, 1990, was marked by an execution that would forever stain the history of Virginia's criminal justice system. Wilbert Lee Evans, who had spent almost a decade on death row, was scheduled to die in the electric chair for the murder of Deputy Sheriff William Gene Truesdale. But what transpired during Evans's execution would later be called one of the worst in Virginia's history. Evans, who had been convicted of the 1981 killing of Truesdale during an escape attempt, had expressed remorse in the months leading up to his execution. He had apologized to the family of Truesdale and made peace with his actions. Despite his efforts at rehabilitation, Evans faced an unyielding fate. His death sentence was confirmed by a U.S. Supreme Court that denied his final appeal. As he stood in the death chamber, Evans clutched a piece of paper containing a plea from Justice Thurgood Marshall, who had called the execution dead wrong. Marshall, a staunch opponent of the death penalty, had been the lone voice in the Supreme Court to vote against denying Evans's appeal. Evans had asked that the paper be buried with him. His fate, it seemed, was already sealed. But what happened next would be far more gruesome than anyone could have imagined. As the first jolt of electricity coursed through his body, witnesses saw blood begin to pour from Evans's eyes, mouth, and nose. It was a scene of horror. The electric chair, which had once been a symbol of finality, became an instrument of agony. Blood streamed down Evans's chin, pooled on the floor beneath him, and soaked into his shirt. Witnesses, including the prison chaplain, later described the scene as a form of torture, with many visibly disturbed by what they had seen. The chaplain, Russ Ford, would later write that he believed Evans's execution amounted to torture. After a second surge of electricity, Evans was pronounced dead at 11:09 p.m. But the questions surrounding his execution were far from over. Virginia prison officials offered various explanations, ranging from the tightness of the mask applied to Evans's face to the possibility that his last meal had contributed to hypertension. But for many, these explanations rang hollow. They did little to erase the memory of the blood streaming from Evans's body, or the disturbing images etched into the minds of those who witnessed his final moments. Ricky Ray Rector. Ricky Ray Rector's execution was one of the most controversial in American history, marked not just by the heinous crimes he committed, but also by the nature of his death. Rector's violent acts began in a restaurant when, in a fit of rage over a friend being refused entry, he shot and killed Arthur D. Criswell and wounded 2 others. After fleeing, Rector spent days evading capture, before finally agreeing to turn himself in, on the condition that he surrendered to his childhood acquaintance, Officer Bob Martin. But when Martin arrived to take him in, Rector shot the officer in the back, killing him. In a final, desperate act, Rector turned the gun on himself, but the shot failed to kill him. Instead, it left him severely brain damaged, a condition that would play a pivotal role in his later execution. Fast forward to 1992, just before his execution, and the world was watching. At this point, Rector's mental condition had deteriorated further, so much so that he was unable to fully comprehend the reality of his execution. He made an eerie, haunting decision before his death. He saved a slice of pecan pie from his last meal, telling the guards that he would eat it later. This bizarre act, combined with his previous lobotomy-like brain injury, highlighted his diminished cognitive state. The execution itself was equally as disturbing. Lethal injection should have been a clean, efficient process, but for Rector, it became a drawn-out ordeal. It took medical staff more than 50 minutes to find a vein that would allow the execution to proceed. Witnesses reported hearing moans from behind the closed curtain as the medical team struggled to locate a proper vein. It's likely that Rector's great weight and the medication he had been given only made the task harder. During the ordeal, Rector helped the execution staff find a vein. The prolonged process, combined with the fact that he was already cognitively impaired, painted the execution as not just a tragic end, but a botched and inhumane one. Thanks for watching. These botched executions highlight some of the most unsettling moments in capital punishment. It's clear that even in the final moments, things don't always go as expected. What's your take on these bizarre cases? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Stay tuned for more chilling stories, and I'll see you in the next one.